You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. We are doing our first 2019 BioTalk edition podcast with a very distinguished individual from the University of Maryland. We have Dr. William Bentley, who's a professor of engineering and the founding director of the Fischell Institute for Biomedical Devices, who's joining us today. Bill, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks so much, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here.
There's a lot to talk about because there's a lot going on both at College Park and with the Fischell Institute. But before we get into some of those details, Bill, let's talk a little bit about your personal background and history so the listeners understand how you got to where you are today.
Okay, great. So academically, I'm a chemical engineer. I got my bachelor's and master's from Cornell University. I worked in industry for an international paper company for a few years and wanted to sort of get really tuned into biological engineering and biochemical engineering. So I went back and got a PhD from the University of Colorado. And then in '89, so it's quite some time ago, I came to the University of Maryland and started, doing the academic thing, going through assistant, associate, full professor kind of a trajectory. Along the way, I helped to direct the bioprocess scale-up facility, which is a facility to help small biotech companies with fermentation and purification of biological products, proteins, et cetera. And then in 2000, we started the graduate program in bioengineering. So Maryland College Park was probably one of the last of the top 20 colleges of engineering to have a bio kind of program. And so we started a graduate program, multidisciplinary graduate program. And then in 2006, I helped found the bioengineering department. It's also called the Fischell Department of Bioengineering, owing to Bob Fischell, and I'll probably talk about him in a minute. And then in 2006, we became the Fischell Department, and then meteoric rise in bioengineering in the country. And then after about 9 years, we started the Fischell Institute for Biomedical Devices. And that's a different entity. And it was originally, conceived in 2005, 2006 timeframe, but didn't really start. Being an academic institution, we needed to educate students. And Bob was really about fixing people's problems with biomedical devices. And so that waited until we started the department. And now it's just about 2 weeks ago, we kicked off the Robert E. Fischell Institute in what became a brand new building, Clark Hall, that houses the bioengineering department. So that's kind of where I am today. I'm the founding director of the Institute and have a really nice opportunity to sort of change the landscape for this technology in the state and in the region.
Well, that's quite a pedigree, Bill. And I think listeners might also be interested in, we talk about the Fischell Institute and Bob Fischell a little bit. Why don't you talk about your interaction with him, how you two progressed, and then also I think what's really significant, the reason the Institute's named the Fischell Institute is because something he did with a donation to the University of Maryland. So give us a little bit of the history of your interaction with Bob and then how it evolved to where it is today.
Great. So actually, there have been a couple of gifts, believe it or not. I mean, huge benefit to the university and to the field in general. So Bob is the inventor of drug-eluting stents and a number of medical technologies. And in the 2005 timeframe, he and his family donated $31 million to help establish the department and the institute. And as I mentioned, the institute sort of waited. Just last year, he's committed another gift to University of Maryland Baltimore for $20 million to bridge the two campuses and build medical device solutions to health problems. Way back, one of the things that was really instrumental was we had a series of meetings with the dean and provost at the time, and Bob was I'll just tell you a little story. It's kind of fun. Was very enthusiastic about trying to provide a mechanism, a catalyst for us to sort of get over the hump as a large state university and build this new field. And he said, Bill, we want to be number one in bioengineering. How do we do that? And so we went to 4 different institutions, one of which is also in Baltimore, and that's Hopkins, which was rated number one in the country. Still is, by the way. Excellent institution, and basically asked the question: what do we have in terms of strengths at Maryland, and what's the field looking like, and then where will we want to go, and can we establish a new place? And based on those observations, he decided to give us those gifts, and they've totally transformed the layout, particularly on the campus, and it provided an impetus, for example, to build Clark Hall. So he and Jim Clark donated a lot of money towards the production of Clark Hall. We started the department. We now have about 450 undergraduates that are getting degrees in bioengineering. And in addition to the gift, and so this is one thing that I'd really like to stress to you, is that he's given his time. It's very rare for people that have those kinds of means and philanthropic ideas to be able to, spend time with students and motivate them. So one of the things that's really neat about working with Bob is that, he'll spend some time. You see a room with 200 or 400 people in it that are thinking about getting into this field, and they might be eventually the next Bob Fischell. So it's just been a tremendous honor for me to work with him, and now to sort of catalyze a new initiative, and that is the Fischell Institute. And so as you asked, what's the Institute really going to try and do? There are 2 main things. One is to catalyze research, so be a melting pot or a collecting entity for people all over the world of different disciplines, especially in the area, to coalesce around themes where devices it would be in quote, because the medical device of the future is going to be very different than the current medical devices because of the connectivity to information and data. But be a melting pot for research and creating new technologies that could eventually be in medical devices that would treat or otherwise prevent disease. So that's one thing. And the university's main mission is education and then creating new knowledge. So that would be sort of a knowledge-based entity and activity. The other is I'm calling it sort of a Fischell foundry, and that is that a lot of times, as you well know, universities do a pretty poor job of taking innovations that occur in the university labs and moving those into the marketplace. And one of the things that is instrumental in that process is the creation of a prototype, something that is more than just an idea, that's sort of tangible, that an investor can get their hands wrapped around. And I'm excited to be able to sort of build that sort of foundry capability in the university, so that innovations, new ideas that are developed in labs can actually result in an entity or a thing or a device that can subsequently attract more investment and then be put into a place where it could be manufactured and cleared by the FDA, for example.
Well, this is all pretty exciting because, Maryland and especially this region is known for biopharma and sometimes the biotechnology world. I think the reputation for medical devices might be emerging, even though with Bob Fischell, there's been leadership here, but maybe it's been a well-kept secret that needs to come out of the closet. And it sounds like this new institute is going to help do that. But one last thing before we leave Bob Fischell is that, when he basically developed the stent that is used widely around the world these days, commercialization of academic research back then was not really a high priority within the University of Maryland system, nor did they have the infrastructure to support those types of activities. So how did he succeed way before it became a priority within the system? And what is his secret to success that could be passed on to other researchers currently trying to do the same thing he did?
Great question. So, and it lays out exactly an issue, and that's where by spending time with Bob, you learn some of these things. So, a couple of things that he's kind of unique about, and that is that he visualizes a problem and then immediately starts to think about a solution to the problem. And typically that solution would be either a mechanical or an electronic kind of solution to the problem. So that's already sort of a characteristic of a person. So I'm not sure that that's something you can widely distribute among people that don't have that sort of creative ingenuity. That said, the problems that he addresses and the solutions that he comes up with have to do a few things, and there's certain characteristics. And if you don't have these various characteristics, it's not going to be worth pursuing. And that's something that anybody can learn from, and we've learned from. So, for example, first you have to fix the patient, if you will, has to benefit. You have to fix the problem. Second, which is also kind of part of the same one, and I've learned this from Jay Perman, who's the president of UMB, is do no harm. So you might fix a problem, but in doing that, you could cause harm somewhere else in the body if it was an implanted device, for example. So those two are key. Then also, somebody has to make money out of this. So you have to tie up, build intellectual property, and that intellectual property has to be manifest into a commercial enterprise, and they have to be able to make money out of the product. And then another thing that's probably unique to the healthcare industry, and that is that you have to lower the overall healthcare cost. If you can do all of these things, no matter what the product is, you're going to have at least the entree to make a change. And those are things that I think we can teach to students, and we can teach to innovators, and we can build into the Institute answers to those questions, or the study of the answers to those questions. And I think that comes from spending time with Bob.
Well, you just described the magic formula for success, and apparently he had all of those elements that were embodied in that success. And the transfer of that knowledge is extremely important. It's great to see that he's willing to mentor today, but more importantly, he's willing to reinvest back into an infrastructure which he believes in. So it's nice to have that endowment to help grow future entrepreneurs out of the engineering and scientific community. So great thing he's doing for the university as well as our region. Let's move on to another area. I know that you're involved in many activities. The Fischell Center is one of the anchors, but also you've been involved recently in a national initiative in trying to compete for excellence in manufacturing of biopharmaceuticals, which is a strength within University of Maryland. So tell us a little bit about this new the NIST National Institute for Innovation of Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. Well, that's a bit a mouthful. I mean, basically it's called NIMBLE, which is the acronym. So introduce us to this new program, which Maryland's a participant in.
Okay, great. Yeah, NIMBLE, as you mentioned, is funded by NIST. It comes from a large initiative in manufacturing in general from the previous federal administration. And that is, it sort of recognized that if manufacturing processes, no matter what the product is outside of the country, is overseas or whatever, then innovations in manufacturing are going to also occur there, because the people that are exposed and making the products come out of the manufacturing process are going to come up with new ideas to make it better. And so then the United States loses in all of that innovation. And new products would come out of that innovation as well, products that facilitate manufacturing processes. So NIMBLE is a consortia, if you will, of companies in the biopharmaceutical space, of which Maryland is quite strong in, and it particularly tuned to the manufacturing issues for these biologics. And so, typical and the most robust in terms of manufactured biopharmaceuticals are monoclonal antibodies, and those are made by recombinant CHO cells in a fermentation cell culture process. And that's something that, as I mentioned way back, I was involved in our bioprocess scale-up facility. And then Hopkins as well, very, very involved in this. And so we actually in this region have a unique strength in that space. And NIMBLE is a mechanism where NIST, the federal government, says to the academic sector as well as the corporate sector, if there are problems that are sort of pre-commercial, that everyone can benefit from, that you haven't solved in industry, but academics can help you, then let's put some money to make you or help you two groups work together. And that's what NIMBLE is. And so it's really led by the industry sector. And it's a way in which the academic community can build its own technology base into the manufacturing suite, in addition to building connectivity and actual solutions to manufacturing processes. The students that are involved in helping that happen then can get employed on those technologies. So it does both things from the university perspective. It educates people in a mode by which they'll immediately get jobs, and it also helps streamline the manufacturing process. So NIMBLE is a huge program. It involves all academic institutions and all biopharmaceutical companies. I'll say also there's another program that's funded by the National Science Foundation, which is sort of a mini NIMBLE, but involves actually more companies because it costs a little less for the companies to join, and that's AMBIC. It's the Advanced Mammalian Biomanufacturing Industry University Consortia, and that's actually headed by us at Maryland, folks at Hopkins, and involves Delaware, which is also a pretty regional and excellent academic institution in this area, Clemson and UMass Lowell. So AMBIC and NIMBLE are both opportunities to interact in a big way between academia and making the process of manufacturing biopharmaceuticals much more convenient. And our Fischell Institute is poised to help with devices that help that process work.
Wow, lots of acronyms, but it sounds like it's all good for the system as well as Maryland, right?
Yeah, it's a little complicated, but definitely plugged into the right part.
Well, let me ask you a question about consortia. Sometime, and I've been involved with several through my career, when you get a lot of academic institutions involved, sometimes it's competitive in dialing for the dollars to see which institution can get the most money out of these federal grants or federal opportunities. Who actually makes the decisions on who has the greatest expertise and how the money gets distributed to make sure that the most appropriate projects get funded?
Oh, great question. So in both of these consortia, the determination is made by the industry representatives. So I'll give you an example of for how AMBIC works. Academics and industry representatives put together topics that are important, and then the academic community proposes little white papers that are like a page. This is what I think I can do. This is why I think it's important for you. And then Industrial Advisory Board convenes and says, okay, we like this, let's say, top 25 white papers. And then those top 25 white papers are invited to the meeting, which happens twice a year. And the academic advisors, professors, community, pitches their talk, just like you and other entrepreneurs would do an elevator pitch to get investment. It's essentially the same thing, where the university folks pitch their idea, and then that night, after several questions, the industry advisory board votes on what projects are important, and the money is pooled. All of the money from all of the industry representatives is pooled, and they decide which projects will be funded. And then you find out the next day. So this is way better than sort of the National Science Foundation or NIH, where a faculty member puts a proposal in, and then about 8 months later gets a success rate of about 8%. Here, immediately. And then in addition to knowing that you're going to have your project funded, the industry representatives assign mentors, and then the mentors work on a monthly basis with the academic sector to develop and make sure that the project is going in an appropriate way. And so it's a very efficient, industry-led system, and Nimble works almost identically. It's a little bit more involved because the money is a little bit is a higher. The amount of money that you can get, or the amount of money that's contributed, is more than in AMBIC, but the same principles are at play. In Nimble, 2/3 of the decision processes are made by industry representatives. 1/3 is made by other entities, including academic institutions and state governments.
Well, I like that process, since BHI is a private-public partnership that really answers to industry. We have found that to be a very effective model, and it sounds like that's a really good working model within both AMBIC and Nimble. And before I leave this, one last question. Based on these programs, which I guess are still relatively new, how has Maryland and Hopkins fared in the things that they have competed for, and have they gotten any awards through this program?
Great question. So the answers in Nimble, I think we got 2 of the first 4 awards ever awarded, and then this last round, I think we got another 5. Several of them had to do with education and training and workforce development. A couple worked on pH measurements online. We're centrally located, close to NIST, close to the FDA, close to the industry, and we're also centrally located programmatically. And the expertise that's here does a really good job of trying to make this thing work. And so it's a real excellent opportunity for the state to shine and really be a major player in this area.
Great. Congratulations on your success, and keep them coming. So we want to get as much of that federal money back into our ecosystem as possible, as well as industry money that has to match. So you touched on a topic which is dear to my heart, and that you talked about the assets that we have to give us some competitive advantage with this region. So talk about some of the things that are not, academically oriented, that are also strong assets that make this a very strong competitive region for what you're trying to accomplish.
Good question. So actually, I have a vision for how the Institute can take advantage of all of the assets. And we all know, with NIST and FDA and NIH and Hopkins and Maryland and Walter Reed, it's a hotbed. And as you mentioned before, in the medical device community, we're not as well recognized. And I think that can change completely. So, and here's why. If you think about medical devices that have biological components, there aren't many. And I think in the future, there will be many. So, for example, the drug-eluting stent of Bob Fischell might eventually tell you your glucose level. It might tell you your cholesterol level if you connect it somehow to your app on your phone. And that kind of information processing is problematic currently, but in the future it won't be. And why do I think that's the case? Well, the information processing that we live on in cell phones and so on, and data analysis, is through electrons and programming. And there are no free electrons and programming in biology. Biology functions by molecular information, and molecules converse with cells. And we'd like to be able to bridge those two systems: biological function by molecules, electronics with electrons. And we've developed manufacturing technologies that allow for that information to cross from biology to electronics and reverse. So that's a little technical. I don't want to go into it in much detail today, but I view that as a way of bridging the biotechnology community in Maryland with the systems and devices, information technology community also in Maryland. So it's those two communities and industries really in the last several decades have sort of gone along in parallel with very little intersection. And that's going to change. And we have that firmly embedded in our geography, that if we can bridge these two communities, then we can create a completely new system of devices that won't be in Minnesota because they don't have the biotechnology community. It won't be in San Diego. They don't have the devices community. It will be here, and it'll be built out of all of the strengths that we have that we've already mentioned. And that's something that I think it's long term, but if we start to bridge those communities, we'll make a big headway. And part of the reason for that, the relatively scarce product contributions in connecting biology with devices, is because you can't put biological entities onto microelectronics. Very difficult. But if the communities get together and do this in an appropriate way, and the technologies are emerging, then we can do that. There's a manufacturing gap. There's also a communication gap. So the biotechnology community talks about introns and exons. The device community talks about PN junctions, and neither of the two understand each other. And if we can start to communicate and get molecules and electrons to talk to each other, then we can actually build new systems and new devices, and that will be here. So that's something I'm trying to, so for the long-term view, the Fischell Institute is embracing that notion, and we have a lot of federal grants that are sort of in line to build those manufacturing technologies. And I'll tell you just one example. One of the things that's most, that the AMBIC and the NIMBLE communities are most excited about is that's a new way of sensing, if you will. So it's electronic sensing of biology. And they're very excited about having an opportunity to understand how cells grow in those bioreactors. You can build devices that will understand how the CHO cells are making their proteins, and then you'll be able to build new systems, new products that come out of that industry, and they'll be here in Maryland.
Well, I like your vision. You basically answered about 3 of my questions in one response, Bill, and you're pretty good at doing that. So the key, though, is that you have the weight of the world on your shoulders to achieve this vision you've talked about. I use the word convergence. And what you've just explained is the convergence of all of these different disciplines that need to interact together. It requires an intermediary. Hopefully, Fischell can be the intermediary to bring all of these things together. The other thing that's helped make our region a little more successful in the bio world is we've had a couple anchor companies with MedImmune and Human Genome Sciences. The thing that we need to do is to find a way. I know that we can interact with the Medtronics and all of the other device companies to have them participate. But we also need to create some of our own device companies within our own region that become headquartered here, homegrown, just like they have in the other regions that you've mentioned. So do you have any idea how we can accelerate the growth of new device companies that we can spin out or leverage the entrepreneurial expertise within this region so that we might 5, 10, 15 years from now have some of them anchored here?
Yeah, I think so. That's one of the things that I think that is almost unique to here. So we have programs like MII at TEDCO and Momentum Fund in the university, all sort of state-initiated programs that are in addition to the federal SBIR and STTR programs. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and it's admittedly the sort of the bandwidth is pretty low, but by building in the Device Institute, if we can build these prototypes in an efficient way and get those into a state where investment can occur, then we're going to build those companies. And so already there are, in addition to Bob Fischell's company that is spun out of a device that we built in the Institute, there are others that are already sort of in the pipeline. And one of the things that I'm trying to do with the Institute is to bridge the University of Maryland Baltimore and the University of Maryland College Park. And as you know, a lot of the innovation, the innovative ideas come from clinicians, that sort of surgeons, for example. They're saying, I wish I could solve this problem by doing such and such, but I don't have time because the next patient is waiting. But if we can sort of have our institute, as well as other entities, just coalesce, like you said, convergence. So, the existence of biohealth innovation is huge in that respect. Is a lot of it is awareness and being able to just sort of pull connections together and make for a more informed public. And when you have catalysts like these other programs that can put pots of money, doesn't have to be a lot, pots of money into play, then you can actually make things happen. So I'll give you another example. So the FDA, which is normally not thought of as a funding agency, I'm co-PI of a National Capital Center collaborative for pediatric device innovation, and that's joint with Children's National Medical Center, just about 10 miles from the College Park campus. And what that funding does from the FDA is to help add to the ecosystem where small companies or ideas can actually get some funding from NCCPDI, but also get connected to people that know about reimbursement, people that know about intellectual property, people that know about building a system, building a device, and also where do I do clinical trials. So all of that kind of thing is actually happening in that NCCPDI. And so there's a whole breadth of kinds of programs, and I think just the awareness, and that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. From just a professor's point of view from Maryland, the fact that you even have BioTalk is huge. Kudos to you. I think this is an outstanding system and organization, and just phenomenal for our region.
Well, thank you, Bill. Maybe you can increase our listener pool to beyond the 100 or so that we have now to thousands and get it known nationally and globally. But I'm glad you used the children example, and this is one of the ways that we probably don't even know that we're working with one another. Is we have a contract with Children's Hospital to utilize our entrepreneurs and residents to assist them in evaluating research that they are developing that has commercial potential, and helping develop commercialization plans with them. And part of that contract is funded by the FDA contract that you mentioned. So indirectly, you're providing some of the technical and scientific expertise to help support them. We're providing some of the commercialization and business assistance and assessment and evaluation. But we are two people passing in the night that probably can get more closely integrated on that project, because we see significant potential in the children's medical device area as you do.
Right. Beautiful.
So last thing before we close, because this has been very informative. And Andy, our producer, Andy Eckert, said, Rich, you have to ask some different questions sometimes. And one of the good ones would be is that you're right in the center of innovation. And everybody has a different definition for what innovation is. But since you're involved in so many different elements of it, Tell us very briefly how you define innovation in your world.
Good question. That's a tough one. Innovation. So innovation in my world is, and I think that's pretty much across the board, is try to do something. So I'll give you just an example of what we're try to do what we're doing now well, right? So as an academic doing research, teaching, do what I can do as best as I can do with what I have. But then take a hard look at what it is that I have, whatever the process that I'm doing research on, and ask the question, if I tweak this, would it be better? Would it be worse? Could I head off into a new direction? And if so, where would it go? And that to me is innovation. So we're continually innovating in education, but also innovating in research. And so when I mentioned sort of putting electronics and using electronics to interrogate biology, one of the things that we've just done, for example, is we built a chip that allows us to electronically program enzymatic function on a chip. We've built a cell that actually is engineered to be programmed by electronics, so turn genes on in a cell. So that came out of trying to understand how cells respond to electronics, but also with the perception that, hey, we know something about how to reorganize genetic circuits. Well, maybe we can make a genetic circuit that responds to electronics. And so this is innovation. So making something new out of something that you're already working on.
Great definition. And I guarantee if I ask that question of everybody that appears on BioTalk, we're going to get a different one from each one. And there is no one right answer. So keep innovating in the way that you are at Fischell, Bill, because I think you're doing a great job. And I'm going to close now and give you the last moment. If you have any closing comments, you're free to communicate to whomever. And I want to thank you for a very enlightening and educational podcast today, talking about everything that's going on at the University System of Maryland and at Fischell and working with you. So any closing comments you have?
Other than I just already mentioned, I think I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll do what I can to make sure that the people, the listeners of your podcasts grow.
Well, spread it around the system when we post it and around your world and all your partners, and we'll basically enlighten more people about how great things are in the medical device world within Maryland and the biohealth capital region. So we've been talking with Dr. Bill Bentley, who's the professor of engineering and founding director of the Fischell Institute for Biomedical Devices. Bill, thanks a lot for appearing on BioTalk, and let's come back again and talk about the progress you're making later down the road.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.